You got to get right with the Get Right Fantasy Network.
And best of luck with your podcast. Appreciate the support.
And you're tuned in to watch my boys at Get Right Fantasy Network. Get you right. Enjoy the show.
But I tune in every Friday. Strategies provided, I will lock in every way. So go and roll your sleeves up. Yeah, go roll your sleeves up. And I'm getting down, cause I roll my sleeves up. And I'm getting right, cause I roll my sleeves up.
What's up, football fans? Welcome to another episode of The Extra Point. I'm your host, Phil Ruskin. It is good to be back. Man, it has been a while since I have done a Wednesday show. I had a personal issue, was taken care of for a couple weeks. A lot of y'all know I'm a former coach. Had a former player of mine actually was an Israeli soldier and was killed in the Israeli war that's happening right now. So I took a couple weeks to process that, and then that rolled right into Thanksgiving. And so now we are back, man. It's good to be here. Let's talk some Dynasty content. Let's start at the top. I think there are two pieces of news that we need to go through before we get into the rest of the contracts that I want to talk about in Dynasty Outlook. But James Conner, now this is not news. Obviously, this happened a couple weeks ago, but James Conner, 2-year, $19 million extension. He is the RB13 in full PPR, the 14 and half. This season, 863 yards with 5 touchdowns, adding 36 catches for 333 yards and an additional touchdown. The big question I have is not about James Conner. It is about Trey Benson, and I'll cover that in just a second. I think this is good news for James Conner. I think this is a reward for what he has done last season and certainly this season. I wonder what it means for Trey Benson, not from his dynasty outlook, but from his viability standpoint. And what I mean by that is, did they reward Conner because he's been good? Did they reward Conner because they don't believe or haven't seen enough out of Benson yet to feel like he's the future and to let Conner's contract expire and hit the free agency market? I don't know the answer. I don't know that we're going to know the answer. What we do know is that they paid Conner for an additional 2 years. So I'm not overly concerned. You know, I saw some people say, "Oh, this is the death of Trey Benson." He's a first-year player. He's a rookie. Like, the dude hasn't broken out yet. I don't know if he will break out next season. That's what we're all expecting. But look at the state of the NFL. I mean, unless you're Saquon Barkley, unless you're Derrick Henry, or Kyron Williams, that truly a 3-down bell cow, everybody in the NFL has 2 running backs, right? Everybody wants the next, Gibbs and Montgomery. If you get that kind of production, great, but most people aren't. But you're still going to have that 1-2 punch. So I don't think this is a death sentence for Trey Benson in the dynasty world. I do think it muddies his outlook. I think I'll use myself as an example. I have a lot of Trey Benson. I believed in the talent coming out last year. I still do. I think he's a good player. I anticipated, as I think a lot of people did, that James Conner would probably not be at least on the Cardinals next season and, obviously somewhere else, and that Trey Benson would basically be handed the keys to the backfield and take over. That obviously is not going to be the case, but we know a couple things about James Conner. He's still an older player. He does get hurt a lot. So I don't think, again, this is the death of Trey Benson. I just think that it's not going to be a full, it may not be a full committee, but it's also not going to be a full transition just to Benson himself. So good for Conner. If you have Conner on your team, you're excited about this. I know I have Conner in a couple places in my dynasty team, so that's exciting. If you want to trade him away because he is getting older and try to get younger, I'm fine with that. We're not going to talk about trade targets tonight or values tonight. We're going to simply focus a lot on contracts because it is the dynasty playoffs. Most trade windows have closed. Or, you have some leagues, like I run a couple leagues where you can't make trades in the playoffs, and then you can obviously reopen the trades once the playoffs have concluded. But still, good news for Conner. And again, I don't think it's the end of the world for Trey Benson. So the other piece of news is a 4-year contract, $33.2 million. And that is Mr. Chuba Hubbard, the running back, 11 and a half, 12 in full. He is already over 1,000 yards with 8 touchdowns, and he has contributed 35 catches for 141 yards and a touchdown. The question that I have about Chuba is they paid him before Brooks tore his ACL. So, similar to Trey Benson, like had the Panthers not seen enough out of Brooks? Did they fear that he wasn't as far enough along in his rehab to really be a contributory piece to say definitively, we've seen enough from you this small sample of this rest of this season? We won't see that now, but before this, because they paid Chuba before the ACL tear. Dave Canales, historically, he's never been a head coach, but as his time in offensive coordinator, has featured one running back. He did that in Tampa Bay. Rashad White had a tremendous season last year. Of course, then he leaves. They draft Bucky. It's a little bit more of a timeshare now. Now Bucky's hurt, so White's back to being the guy. But I think this is going to be more of a committee than Connor and Benson is. It's going to be more one-sided than Connor and Benson is, whereas I think Connor and Benson could end up being a little bit of a committee. Brooks is going to miss the majority, if not all, of 2025. So Chuba's the guy. The question that I would have for paying attention, and please start paying attention to rookies, especially if if you're in the playoffs, you don't know where your rookie draft picks are going to be unless you have someone else's picks. If you are not a playoff team, you should know where you're going to be. And so start looking at, as you start to do your research, I think the Panthers are a team that drafts a running back. I know that they just drafted Brooks, but Brooks is going to miss all of 25. So they potentially draft a third, fourth round running back, a day 2 running back. They potentially hit the trade market and go grab somebody who's we're going to talk about here in a little bit. Because again, it could be Chuba, but I think depth is going to be important. And if you know that Brooks will miss the majority, if not all of 25, you got to have somebody else in the building. And you can't tell me it's Miles Sanders. So I think Chuba, this is a great news if you're a Chuba Hubbard owner. It's still the Panthers, but again, we care about volume. He should get everything. He's the running back 11 on one of the worst teams in football. So the overall outlook for the Panthers could get better next season. May not. We'll see. But great news for Chuba. And I think this is hard for Brooks because the missed season in 25 means now you're getting into year 3 in 26 of your rookie contract, and he's got less than 50 snaps under his belt. So I think we'll need to pay attention to Jonathan Brooks. Good news for Chuba, good news for Connor, and we need to pay attention to Benson. So let's talk about a couple other of guys that I think we're going to need to pay attention to, and let's start at the quarterback position. There's 2 names that I want to talk about here, and their contracts are up in 24. The first one is Russell Wilson. We know the Broncos are paying $97 million of his salary and that he's on a 1-year deal with the Steelers. I think Russ has been okay this season. It's not been as bad, I think, as a lot of people feared that it would. It's not been great. Like he's QB 29, so it's not like he's a top 15 quarterback. But at the end of the day, I think a lot of people felt like he was just guaranteed to lose the job at some point, and Justin Fields would take over, whether it was poor play or whether it was just whatever the reasons may be. But I think Russ has done enough to merit consideration for another team to pick him up next season if the Steelers don't bring him back. And I'd be a little surprised if the Steelers don't bring him back. Again, they'll have to rework some of that contract, $97 million in dead cap for the Broncos, and they'll still pay another year of his salary. So I don't know what won't be able to get a league minimum deal next year. But Russell Wilson has some value in Superflex, and I think he probably has 1 to 2 more years worth of value in Superflex. So if you're looking for a QB3, if you're looking for a QB4, Russell Wilson's probably going to be in the league, and he certainly has a chance to be a starter. So don't shy away. It's not someone I'm saying go out and trade for. It's not someone I'm saying needs to be one of your 2 guys you're really counting on as a plug-and-play weekly starter. But as a QB3 for bye weeks or in case of injury, you could do a lot worse than Russell Wilson because, again, I do think he'll be a starter somewhere. The other guy I want to talk about is Sam Darnold, right? I mean, Sam Darnold was, honestly, kind of people were laughing, right? Like, oh, my God, Sam Darnold, he can't possibly, do anything. The Vikings season is over. He's QB7. So the big question that I have for Sam Darnold is, what do the Vikings do? Because you have J.J. McCarthy. You drafted him in the first round. You drafted him in the top 10 or 11, whatever pick he was. Doesn't matter. But you drafted him to be the guy moving forward. And now you have Sam Darnold, who not only has been very good, but your team's in the playoffs in a division where you're not even the best team in your own division at 11-2. So I think for me, Darnold is a guy that really we have to think about McCarthy but it's a player that we need to keep tabs on. I don't think the Vikings are going to let him go. I think the Vikings, if they're smart, will keep him. They'll let him probably start the season as the guy, play for a while, and then if things go poorly, they'll turn to McCarthy, or they'll start working McCarthy in as they need, and kind of treat next year as his rookie season. But I can't see Sam Darnold getting a massive contract. But I also know that there's enough QB teams, needy teams in the NFL, that if the Vikings really see enough this spring, or really feel like they've got, the keys to the kingdom and ready to hand it over to McCarthy, it's possible Darnold get moved. But I think Darnold is worth picking up in your leagues, possibly trading for again, more so than the names that I'm about to mention, is kind of these solid backups here whose contracts are also up in 24. And that's Jameis Winston, Justin Fields, and Joe Flacco. Winston, Fields, and Flacco, I put them all in one category. They're just guys that you should have on your roster as your QB4, QB5, because inevitably they're going to play. It just seems to be that way every season. I know Flacco's older, so maybe this is kind of the end for him. But Winston, Cleveland made a mistake last year in not bringing back Flacco. They got Winston. I think they don't learn. I think they learn from the mistake and they bring Winston back this season. We don't know how long Deshaun Watson will miss going into next season. Winston's the better player. You guys know I hate Deshaun Watson for personal reasons, but I hate him for professional reasons because he's not a good player. He's not a good quarterback. But I do think those three guys are guys that shoot a third rounder out there, fourth round pick. You'll never miss those picks, and go grab yourself a solid backup quarterback who will inevitably start a couple games for you at some point in 2025. Speaking of 2025 at the quarterback position, let's talk about 4 names, really 3 names, because one of these is super easy. These are contracts that will come due in 2025. This one I don't think is going to make it. It's not going to matter. I think he's going to get paid this offseason, and that's Brock Purdy. There's just not a world where the Niners don't pay him. I can't see him resetting the quarterback market, but I would have said the same thing about Trevor Lawrence. I would have said the same thing about I don't remember whoever the hell else got paid this, Tua, and whoever else got paid this season that should not have gotten paid more than Joe Burrow did. But again, that's the way that it goes in the NFL these days. Is the quarterback market isn't about how many games you've won or Super Bowls or playoff wins. It's about the year that you're getting Trevor Lawrence, one playoff win, which was really more of a Chargers blowing the lead. So to me, Brock Purdy will get paid, so don't worry about his contract coming due in 25. But Aaron Rodgers, Geno Smith, and Gardner Minshew's contracts are up in 25. Minshew's going to go back to a backup role, whether that's with Vegas or another team. Similar to Winston, Fields, and Flacco, he's somebody that if you have on your roster, keep him, stash him. If you don't have him on your roster, I wouldn't trade for him, but he's going to be relevant in some capacity. He'll probably be on your waiver wire in single quarterback leagues. So when injuries and bye weeks happen, keep an eye on him. But Geno's interesting because I just don't know what Geno does. I think there's 2 possibilities. I think he reverts to a backup role if he wants to stay in the league after this contract with Seattle's up. I don't see him getting signed to be a starter somewhere else with his age. I also think it's possible he retires. So if you have Geno, I don't know that you can trade him away right now. I think you have to ride it out, which is fine for one more season. But I would trade for a quarterback in a league a super flex league where you have Geno, or I would draft a quarterback in a league where you have Geno, because it's, again, I like to play Dynasty. I preach about playing Dynasty in a 2 to 3 year window. Geno's got a year and whatever's left of this season. So I think it's time to start preparing for life after Geno. The other one's Aaron Rodgers. He's going to retire. I don't see a world where anybody's going to pay him after this fiasco. He's old. He's injured. The Jets stink. He says he's going to come back and play, and he says he wants to play next year in New York. I don't even know if that happens. So I think if you have Rodgers on your roster, you're stuck with him. I don't see a world where you can trade him away. You can't cut him. I think you just have to ride it out, but I don't see him getting a starting position, a starting quarterback job in after 2025, after next season. And he's too arrogant to take a backup job. So I think it's retirement for Rodgers. Before we get into the running backs, let's pay some bills. Y'all know who brings us the show each and every week. It is our good friends over at Underdog. Make sure you jump onto Underdog and sign up now. We love their best ball tournaments. I am in too many best ball tournaments, but in the Schnauzer 8, it was a 20 max entry. 8 of my 20 entries are advancing to the next round, our playoff teams. I know Rasta has a ton of rosters as well. He has won and taken down a ton of tournaments, as has Kendall, Tycoon, and Mike. So make sure you use the promo code GETRIGHT. You can get up to $1,000 in bonus cash. I used to get $100, but we love the folks over at Underdog. And again, use that promo GETRIGHT. Deposit now and get up to $1,000 in bonus cash. Let's talk about some running backs. And in 2024, at the end of this season, there are 5 viable names that you need to be paying attention to. Let's start with the Steelers. Najee Harris did not get his 5th-year option picked up. I just don't see a world where they bring him back. It's not Mike Tomlin's style. It's just not what they've historically done. I don't think Najee has merited coming back on a deal. If they were going to pay him, why didn't they pay him? That's my biggest question, right? If they were going to keep him, why didn't they at least pick up the 5th-year option? So I think this doesn't scream free agency, but I do think Najee Harris hits the free agent market next year. And so if you're the Najee Harris owner, you may have to do one of two things. You may have to call your shot and say, I think I'm going to get max value now off the name alone and try to trade him. Or you just hope and pray that he lands somewhere where he's going to probably not be the guy again, but probably be in a good, maybe the 1A to somebody's 1B. Dallas screams running back. So I think, I think Genty is probably on everyone's radar as, somebody that should get drafted, should be the RB1 overall off the board, and potentially even for the first time in 2 years, a running back drafted in the first round. But let's just see where Harris goes. I just don't think it's going to be Pittsburgh. So I think you'll see Najee in a different uniform next year. On the other side of that is Jaylen Warren. I think Jaylen Warren will get paid. I don't think he's going to get a big contract. He's certainly not going to reset the market. But Jaylen Warren's a pass catcher. He's a little bit faster, more versatile than Najee Harris is. I have no idea if Arthur Smith will be the OC or not. We'll find that out later. But I do think Jaylen Warren's going to be a Steeler next season, and I think that's a good thing. I think he fits their offense. He fits their scheme. I think he's a player that's useful. He's going to be a top 36 guy, and he has top 24 potential in the right environment. So Jaylen Warren, if he's on your roster, again, probably going to be in the black and gold next year. And that should be a good thing moving forward as a depth piece on your dynasty roster. I want to talk about Aaron Jones for a minute. I think Aaron Jones comes back. I get the age, but like he's had a great season. So does he come back on a 1-year deal with the Vikings? Does he come back on a 2-year deal? I really don't see him hitting free agency. So if Aaron Jones is on your roster, again, I know the age, but if he comes back to the Vikings and you want to trade him away because it's a 1 or 2 year contract, and again, you want to get younger and somebody believes that he's got a 1 or 2 year ceiling that helps their team, fine, great. But again, I think he'll be a Viking, and I think it's a player that's probably got 1 or 2 more years in the NFL as a starting running back. And you need starting running backs on your roster. You need guys on your roster that have the potential to break out as true starting running backs do. And Jones fits that mold. The two guys I have big questions about, let's start with the easier of the two. It's Rico Dowdle. He's been great the last 2 weeks. I mean, freaking fantastic the last 2 weeks, and the Cowboys suck. I don't know if he's going to be a Cowboy. I don't. Nobody knows. It's Jerry Jones. I mean, it's like I just did a playoff preview for my main dynasty league, and I had a joking sponsored by the Magic 8 Ball where I said, you'll get into the playoffs, and I put all the Magic 8 Ball responses. I feel like that's what Jerry Jones does. He just shakes his Magic 8 Ball there, and he's like, oh, I don't like that answer. And I have no idea what Jerry's doing, but Rico Dowdle is useful. He's a good player. He catches passes. He's quick. He's shifty. He's a useful player. So again, I'm not sitting here saying trade for him. I don't know who he's going to play for next season. But he's a guy that if he's on your roster, I think he's probably going to get a small contract, 2-year deal somewhere. And I think that helps you. I think that'll be good. The question mark that I had about this player is, and again, I said I started with the easier of the two. I have no idea what to do with Javonte Williams. I have no idea if he'll be in Denver. I don't know if somebody else will pick him up. I'm sure somebody will pick him up, but in what role? Is someone going to sign him to be a starter? Is someone going to sign him to be a part of a committee? Is he going to be I won't say gadget player, but he's going to be a short yardage back for a team that has a pass catcher? So I, I said last year, trade Javonte away. I say trade Javonte away now. The problem is the value is so low right now that I think you have to hold and just wait. You're just going to have to hope and pray that maybe because he could land in Pittsburgh with Jalen Warren. He could land in Dallas. He could land in Carolina with Chuba Hubbard because Brooks is out. Like money will dictate who can and can't afford him, but he's not getting a big deal. He's certainly not getting top of the market or even middle of the market contract. So if he can't win the job in Denver, where they truly don't have an alpha, and he can't even win that job, where is he going to go where he's going to be the alpha elsewhere? So I think if you have Javonte, you're stuck for a while until he lands somewhere, and we'll just have to kind of figure out what that looks like. But he's someone whose contract is up. So before I get into the 2025 contracts, because there's a ton of them and they're big names, I want to just address this because I had somebody actually months and months ago, kind of someone who was newer to Dynasty, was a friend of mine. He said, look, I'm trying to get into my first Dynasty league. What's the big difference? What do I not know? And we talked through a lot. But one of the things that I told him is I said, look, contracts matter. And he's like, okay, I get that, but like, why? And I said, look, contracts matter because what you're getting is a defined period of time where the team is saying with their wallet, we value you. So Justin Jefferson resets the wide receiver market. Great. Everyone knows Justin Jefferson's really good at football. He's going to get whatever, a million and a half years at $500 billion. Great. When we get to the 2025 wide receiver contract, guess whose contract's up in 2025? Jamar Chase. Y'all don't need to hear that Jamar Chase is good at football. I expect him to reset the wide receiver market. But for these other players that aren't Jamar Chase, that aren't Justin Jefferson, right? Why do the contracts matter? Because they're going to be part of that team. They're going to be part of that system, right? So we talked a lot about Josh Jacobs. And so as we get into the starters here for 2025, Josh Jacobs' contract isn't part of the 25 contracts because it's not up. But there was a lot of money that was guaranteed to Jacobs this season. And there wasn't a huge dead cap if the Packers wanted to get out of that contract. Josh Jacobs has become the focal point of that offense. I think that's bad news for Marshawn Lloyd. I know a lot of people, myself as one of them, was excited about Marshawn Lloyd. I still think he's going to be relevant, right? The Packers historically have used a two-back system, right? They did it with Aaron Jones and A.J. Dillon successfully for a couple of years before A.J. Dillon really fell off a cliff. So I think there's a world where Marshawn Lloyd is useful, but Josh Jacobs' contract is going to be relevant for the next 2 more years because of what he's done this season. You have yourself a starter in Green Bay with Josh Jacobs in an offense that you like. That's why contracts matter. So let's talk about some guys in 2025 whose deals will be up and they will either hit free agency or re-sign. The first one, the King himself. Look, it's King Henry. I don't know what the Ravens are going to do in the playoffs this season. My sincere hope is that they can beat the Chiefs or the Bills can beat the Chiefs. But I think if the Ravens make the Super Bowl and win, that's probably the end for Derrick Henry. That's my honest opinion. What would he have to come back for? Maybe one more chance to run it back. But if they don't make the Super Bowl or they don't win the Super Bowl, I think he comes back on a 1-year deal or retires. I'll bet he comes back on a 1-year deal, and I'll bet he comes back with the Ravens. It gives him the best chance to win. Breece Hall, this one's easy. His rookie deal's up. He's going to re-sign with the Jets. I don't see a world where they let him go. KW3, Kenneth Walker III, his rookie deal is up after 25. And both, by the way, Hall, I don't see a world where he gets let go or doesn't re-sign with the Seahawks. By the way, Kenneth Walker III and Breece Hall, their 5th-year option could get picked up before that, so we could know the answer to these questions because they were both Walker was a 2nd-round pick, I believe. Hall was a 1st. I have to go back and check that, but their contracts are up in 25. If you're in chat, fact check me on that. I think maybe they were both 2nds, if I remember. I don't know. I've confused myself. Point being is that they're both going to re-sign. I can't see a world where they hit free agency. Austin Eckler, interesting, right? Like, I think for him, it's probably free agency or potentially retirement. I don't see the Commanders bringing him back, but we'll see. Zach Moss, I think it's free agency or re-signs with Cincinnati. Coming back off IR, he should be good to go. They paid him a couple years, so he's obviously under contract again next year. And then they're obviously going to have to pay Jamar Chase, and I think we'll talk about him when we get to the receivers. I think they'll let Higgins go, so it's possible they use a draft pick on another receiver. But I think Moss comes back to Cincinnati. Walker was a second-round pick. Thanks, John Connor. Appreciate you. Yeah, I knew that one. I think it was Hall was more my question. Is Hall a second-rounder or not? James Cook, his rookie deal is up in 25. He's going to re-sign with Buffalo. B-Rob, Brian Robinson Jr. in 25. His rookie deal is up. I believe he re-signs with Washington. So the players that we have some questions about would be Kyren Williams. The obvious answer is he should re-sign with LA. Sean McVay loves the one running back system. That's his thing. I just don't see a world where he lets him go. He's just been so damn good. And as long as he's healthy, they should pay him and move on. But again, we haven't seen much out of Blake Corum. If Blake Corum suddenly has a breakout season next year, it is possible Kyren hits free agency. But either way, you're going to want Kyren Williams on your team, whether he's in LA. If he's not in LA, that maybe changes his value. We'll take that conversation into another day. So I think for me, it's less about Kyren's value as a player. It's more about where his landing spot is if it's not LA. But I do think he'll be a Ram. Pacheco, I think he re-signs with the Chiefs. He's been getting worked and ramped back up these last couple of weeks. He's getting more snap share. He's getting more run. Kareem Hunt's value he's older, but also his snap share is decreasing. Pains me to say this, but if the Chiefs make another Super Bowl run and Pacheco's a part of it, as he will be, he'll be there. Pacheco, like Kyren Williams, is a player you're going to want on your fantasy team again, regardless of where he is. So in 2025, the question mark that I have, the largest in big, bold letters, is Travis Etienne. His rookie deal's up in 25. He was a first-round pick. So there's going to be a new coaching staff there. Doug Peterson's going to get fired. There's just not. I'm surprised Doug Peterson has yet to be fired. So unless I've missed some breaking news. So the questions are about Travis Etienne's contract. The questions are going to be about who the new coach is. What do they value? Who do they value? Do they want Etienne? So I think Etienne is still going to be a good player, and I think he's still going to be in the league. I actually just traded, not for Travis Etienne, but I traded for some first-round picks that included Travis Etienne as a part of that deal. I got 2 first-rounders in Travis Etienne. I got a 25 first and a 26 first. Plus Travis Etienne for straight up for Derrick Henry. So I couldn't pass that deal up. My team was 1 win away from the playoffs, and I lost the game. And I said, "That's it. Mathematically, I need to win out, and I have to have help." And I didn't think I would get the help, and I didn't end up winning out anyway. So I feel great about that deal. I don't love the Etienne, but the picks is really what I traded for, especially with Derrick Henry. So I think to me, Travis Etienne is a player that you need to really pay attention to this next year in 2025 on a contract year, because we don't know who the coach is going to be. And you'll have to make some decisions about what to do with him as we get into this off season, as we get into draft season, both rookie draft and real, NFL draft, where we see what the teams actually do. That could help us to make some determinations on some of these players as well. John Connor, appreciate you being here, man, helping me out tonight a little bit. Hall was 36, so no 5th-year option for him as a second-round player. Won't matter. He'll be a Jet. Let's talk about some guys whose contracts are up this year at the wide receiver position. It's a lot of old names and one big, sexy name, and everybody knows who it is. So why don't we just start there? It's T. Higgins. T. Higgins should be and will be the hot free agent this offseason. I think he's going to get a deal. I think everyone expects him to get a deal. I project it's going to be a 4-year deal. I don't think it's going to be top of the market money. He's not in that Amon-Ra, Jamar Chase, JJ conversation. But I do think he's in that kind of second tier down. And so I think it'll be really, really interesting with T. Higgins. Number one, Cincinnati kind of has that first shot at him. I don't know why they wouldn't bring him back other than just cap space. I know he wants to be the guy. You'll never be the guy with Jamar Chase there, but do you want to win? And I think he'll have the best chance to win in Cincinnati. Now, I say that not knowing where he could go. The rumors are already circling that the Patriots are ready to, roll out the welcome wagon and give him, gold and silver and all these things, whatever he needs, they're going to do it to get him. But does he want to go there? Right? Like I don't project the Patriots to be much better next season than they were this year. I don't think they're going to be pathetic, but they're not going to be good. I think they're still 2 years away, and they're two good draft classes and maybe 2 free agency classes away from really truly being competitive. Not necessarily in their own division, just in the league in general. So it's hard for me to see T. Higgins going to the Patriots as a player. And I say to myself, all right, let's assume I get a 4-year deal. Do I really want to spend 2 years waiting for my team to even be competitive? I get it. His team's not competitive now, but his team's not competitive now because they're losing close games and their defense is up and down. And Joe Burrow's having an MVP caliber season. He'll win comeback player of the year. He won't win the MVP because the Bengals suck. Jamar Chase is the number 1 wide receiver in the league, and they're losing. So I don't see that being much of a difference, but does T. Higgins wind up in LA on either of the LA teams? Very possibly. Does he wind up in New England? Possibly. Does he wind up in Dallas? I mean, there's like 500 places that he could go. Well, 31 places that he could go. But I do think that he's going to be the biggest name, and I think he's going to get paid. I think everyone expects that. So the question will be does he become a true alpha, or does he go somewhere where he can be the 1A and then there's somebody else that's the 1B, where it's kind of the inverse of what he has in Cincinnati? But he will get paid this offseason. So that's the easy one. Here comes all the big names that once were big names that are now old guys. Amari Cooper, probably a 1 to 2 year deal in free agency or retirement. I don't think he comes back to the Bills. It's possible, of course, but I think he gets a 1 or 2 year deal. And as long as he gets a deal in a place where he's going to get a decent target share, he's useful for your fantasy team. Keenan Allen, I project him to retire. If he doesn't, he'll get a 1 year deal max in free agency, and it won't be in Chicago. Brandon Cooks, probably similar to Amari Cooper, a 1 to 2 year deal. I haven't valued Cooks the last couple of seasons. I just don't. I think he's lost a step from his blazing days where he was kind of Tyreek before Tyreek was really Tyreek. He was that super downfield threat for the Saints, and then that for the Rams, that Super Bowl run. But in Dynasty, you need a player like Brandon Cooks every now and again for bye weeks, for injuries. So if he does land a 1 or 2 year deal, fine. I don't have any shares of him. I don't get excited about him, but I know there's people that believe that he can still catch 5 touchdowns a year and give you 600 yards. Sometimes you need that. Nuke, DeAndre Hopkins, probably a similar 1 to 2 year deal or possibly retirement. He's never been to the Super Bowl. I don't know. We'll see what happens with the Chiefs this season. But again, probably not somebody you're trading for. And if you have him, you hope he gets a decent market, target market share wherever he lands. These other 2 names are really interesting because one of them's in the doghouse right now and the other one's on IR. So let's start with the IR, and it's Stephon Diggs. If you're a fan of the show, if you have listened to the show, if you've read any of my content, I said a long time ago, and I'll maintain it, I did not think that Stephon Diggs would be on the Houston Texans in 2025. I don't know if that's true now. The Texans have not had the world beater season we expected them to have. I think Stephon Diggs, with his contract being voided, is going to demand more money than teams want to pay him. The Texans give him the best chance to win. He's, from all intents and purposes, I don't know the man, but from what I read and what I hear, he is a locker room cancer. So I just don't know where he's going to be. I could see him coming back to the Texans now because of the injury and because maybe they'll say, hey, the Texans take the stance of this gives us the best chance to actually try and get back to where we expect to be, especially in a division that they should win again. But it's possible he's elsewhere. So with his age, he's not someone I'm trading for in Dynasty. He is someone I'm actively, and I don't have him, but I've encouraged for people, fans of the show, please trade him away. You obviously can't do that now because you couldn't do that weeks ago because of the injury. So if he comes back to the Texans, you need to hold him for the first couple of weeks and hope he has a couple of big breakout, games, and then send him away. Or you have to hope that he, lands somewhere where he's going to be the alpha, even if that's Cleveland or someplace where, Tennessee, where he could end up being the guy. The other name is Deontay Johnson. Again, another player I've encouraged everyone to trade away. He's in the doghouse right now in Baltimore. He's not playing in Baltimore prior to having a suspension. So, again, you can't trade him away. I do think someone's going to give him a contract, though. So if you can get 1 or 2 more years out of Deontay Johnson, then similar to Diggs, hope that he has a couple of 2025 weeks 1 through 3, a couple touchdowns or, a 100-yard game in one of those 3 weeks. Put him on the block and take what you can get. In 2025, bunch of names, big names. Courtland Sutton. I think it's likely that he becomes a free agent, but he's the only guy there. He's been the only guy there. He's got some chemistry with Bo Nix. So it's possible that he comes back. And if he comes back, I think they give him a 2-year deal. And I think that's a pretty good spot, actually, for Courtland Sutton. He's been useful. I've flexed him in some of my leagues. I don't have him in a ton of places. I think I only have him on like 1 or 2 leagues. But I think it's possible that if he comes back to Denver, that is his best landing spot outside of, going to a team where he's just really, I just don't see him being the guy at his age elsewhere. So Denver, to me, as of today, seems like the best landing spot for him. This one will probably make me cry, but it's more than likely than not, Roster, if you're here, you're going to cry about it too. But I think Deebo Samuel after next season is a cap casualty in old San Francisco. I think they're going to pay Purdy this season. They have already paid Brandon Ayuk, so obviously the injury to Ayuk doesn't impact his contract. They've paid George Kittle. They've paid a bunch of guys on the defense. So if they're going to pay Purdy, somebody's got to go. And I know Deebo's been the focal point of that offense for a long time. I know George Kittle's having an amazing season, but Deebo's been the identity of that team. He's also getting older, and, we're not winning Super Bowls. So Shanahan's going to have to look about something else. You drafted Jacob Cowing this year. You drafted Ricky Pearsall this year. I think they did that for 2 reasons. 1, they didn't know if Brandon Ayuk would be back. 2, they were thinking about moving Deebo this season. So I think Deebo goes. It sucks, but I do think he's going to be given a 2-year contract elsewhere. And you'll have to see where that contract is, because if it's not San Francisco, how does that team use him? Because if it's just as a wide receiver, I think Deebo's value is on the decline with his age and with his production level, his injury history. If they're going to use him in the backfield, if it's a gadgety offense, if wherever Bobby Slowick or Ben Johnson wind up, as head coaches and they get Deebo somewhere on their teams, then we'll talk about it. But for right now, Deebo's probably somebody I'm trying to trade away while he still has some value. Terry McLaurin, I think he has 2 more years of value given his age, maybe 3 years where you can actually count on him for some consistent production. I think he comes back to Washington. T. Higgins could wind up anywhere, but T. Higgins is a guy that I think could go to Washington with that young team and the young, Cliff Kingsbury and what's going on there. So Washington is being talked about as a destination where guys actually want to go now versus like, please don't send me there. So even if Terry comes back to Washington or if he goes somewhere else, I think he's a guy you can count on for a wide receiver 3, wide receiver 2 production. In your fantasy team pretty consistently, at least as a minimum, as a flex play weekly for the next 2 years. DK Metcalf, I think he comes back to Seattle. I think this is his last contract with Seattle. I think they pay him. I think they pay him 4 years. I don't know what the money will come out to, but it'll be a 3 or 4 year deal after next season in a contract season, because I do think that they're going to go the rookie quarterback route, or they're going to get a bridge quarterback to draft a quarterback the year after, which means that they have the money for Deebo. For Deebo, looking at my show notes, for DK. JSN still on his rookie deal. Tyler Lockett is a name that is right under DK. He's got a 1-year deal, probably somewhere outside, either a 1-year deal in Seattle or retirement. I think that's probably where he's at. JSN has clearly passed him up. So I think the money will be there for DK. But again, we did talk about KW3 earlier, so we'll see if Lockett does end up going and they go a cheap quarterback, then you can pay KW3, you can pay DK, keep your nucleus together with JSN, and that's a pretty good team in Seattle. Jacoby Myers is really interesting, right? Like he's the only guy in Las Vegas. I know Rasta here in the chat. Appreciate you, brother, being here, saying Higgins to Las Vegas. I think it's more likely than not that Antonio Pierce gets the boot and Vegas starts all over. I really hope it is not a Sanders and Sanders. I would love to see Shedeur Sanders be on a team without his father as the coach, even though I love Prime. But I do think Jacoby Myers gets 2 to 3 year deal somewhere outside of Vegas. I think he's still useful for your fantasy team. Again, probably not a guy I'm trading for unless he's in Vegas and they don't draft anyone. But I do think Wicked Pompano in here attempted to buy low. Yeah, I would buy low if you could on Myers as well. But I do think he's a guy that's going to be useful. Mike Evans, probably a 1 year deal coming back to Tampa, or a 1 year deal kind of Keenan Allen. He's at that age after 25, after next season. Will be his last year on that contract in Tampa Bay. He'll probably get a 1 year deal somewhere. My guess is if he leaves Tampa, he'll want to go to a contender. Can't believe these words are going to come out of my mouth, but he'll probably go to the fucking Chiefs, right? Or he'll go to, somebody that's a upper echelon team, the Bills, somebody that could really potentially, the Bengals, if they lose T. Higgins and they need a guy for one season with Jamar Chase, it's possible they could get a Mike Evans. So we'll see what that looks like. But I think Mike Evans is still going to be useful for this next year in 25 and probably for one more year after that. And then the biggest of all the big names in 2025, his contract won't ever make it to that far. He'll get paid this offseason. It is Jamarvelous. And I would expect him to reset the wide receiver market. We finally get to talk about some tight ends because we don't get to talk about tight ends very often because, well, they're just sort of there these days. I hate to say this, but in 2024, there is nobody worth talking about. I do not want to hear about Tyler Conklin being a free agent after this season. If Tyler Conklin is on your roster and you are starting him, you need to trade for a tight end, or you need to draft a tight end, or you need to just take the 0 every week. Sorry, I just bashed Tyler Conklin, but I don't feel that bad doing it. There is nobody worth talking about. I literally wrote in my show notes, no one, zilch, nada, nothing, empty, 0. In 2025, holy shit, there's a few fellas. George, we love George Kittle. He is the best. He is on a 2 year deal with the 49ers. His contract is up in 25. Excuse me. I think he'll sign a 2 year deal. I think he'll come back to the Niners. He's 31 years old. Travis Kelce's 35 years old. So I think he can play for a couple more years. Losing Debo means they have the money to bring George back. It'll be a reduced, maybe not a salary decrease in what they're paying him, but it's not going to be a market resetting contract. But that position is so scarce and he is so damn good and he is so important for that offense that I do think he comes back to the Niners. I don't see him hitting free agency. A million things could happen and change between today, December 11th of 2024, and free agency in 25. But Kittle probably comes back. Dallas Goedert, 29 years old. Again, giving you some ages here, simply not in the other position, simply because the tight end position is so scarce and some of these guys can play longer. So I think he comes back to the Eagles on a 2 year deal, but I could also see him hitting free agency. Dallas Goedert's a player I'm trying to trade away. I don't think you'll get much for him, but again, if he comes back to the Eagles, the name value alone, you could sell it as, oh, it's tied to Jalen Hurts and he's an AJ Brown injury, or he's a Devonta Smith injury away from being the guy. And that's actually true. He had some good games when those guys missed time this season, but he's not a true alpha. He's not a target market guy that's just going to demand targets. And especially in that offense with Saquon on a contract, AJ Brown and Devonta Smith all on contracts. So if you have Dallas Goedert and he does get re-signed to the Eagles, trade him. If he goes somewhere else, trade him and hope that he goes somewhere where he's quote unquote going to be the guy. Hope that he lands in Tennessee, or someone that doesn't have a good tight end, and sell him. Mark Andrews, 29 years old. His contract will be due in 20. He's on a contract year in 25. I think this one's a no-brainer. I think the Ravens re-sign him to a 3 or 4 year deal and move on. I think it's too easy for them. Evan Ingram, 30 years old. His contract will be up in 25. I think he hits free agency. I don't see him coming back to the Jaguars. If there's a new coaching staff, I don't think they're going to want to inherit a 30-year-old tight end, and I don't think they're going to want to make a decision in their first year as a new staff of what to do with a 30-year-old tight end. So I think Evan Ingram is probably out in Jacksonville, and that could change his fantasy value. We'll talk about that when he lands somewhere. Travis Kelce, 35 years old. I think the writing is on the wall. I think he's alluded to it, even though he says he's playing until the wheels fall off. If those fuckers win the Super Bowl again in the next 2 years, he's 100% retiring. If they don't, I still think he retires. He's got more money from TV coming in than he's ever made in football. If this thing with Taylor Swift turns into a real marriage, then good for them. But I think he's going to go do life after football, and seeing what his brother's been doing probably just means he's on the way out. So, and if you've got Kelce, get everything you can out of him in the next year and a half, in 4 weeks, 3 weeks, and that'll be it. David Njoku, 28 years old. I think he hits free agency. I think Njoku's still valuable. If he comes back to Cleveland, that's good. If he goes somewhere else, I think that's fine. I would actually trade for Njoku. If you can get him for a second, I think that's a solid trade. Even at 28, I know that seems older, but we're talking about guys that are already over 30. We're talking about Kelce, who's 35, George Kittle, who's 31. Not this season for Kelce, but historically we know what Kelce has done. George Kittle obviously having a great season this year and has had great seasons. So I think Njoku is still I know it's ridiculous to say a top 12 guy, because that doesn't mean you're good at the tight end position, but I think he still has top 8 potential, even at 28. And I do think he hits free agency. Taysom Hill's a free agent. I think he probably retires at 34, especially being on IR and out for the season. And then let's talk about some guys that are Noah Fant. I have no idea what to do with. I wouldn't, if he's on your team, you can't trade him, but you just hope and pray he gets a contract. So let's talk about some of the younger guys, because these guys are really interesting names here. I don't think Atlanta is going to bring Kyle Pitts back. I don't see why they would. He hasn't done enough to live up to the number 3 overall pick. He hasn't done enough to live up to really anything. And I love Kyle Pitts. I'm from Gainesville, Florida. I loved him at the University of Florida. The Gators are my college team. I thought he would be the guy. I thought he would be the next Kelce, the next Andrews. And he still could be. He's only 24 years old. Tight ends don't always just I mean, we've been spoiled the last 2 years with, Sam Laporta and now Brock Bowers coming in and just being freaks at the tight end position in year one. But Pitts is 24, guys. It is very possible that he still has a lot of value, and maybe his best days are ahead of him. And maybe he needs a change of scenery. Maybe he needs to go somewhere else. So I don't think it's going to happen for him in Atlanta, but he's a guy that you need to pay attention to this coming season, because, again, I do think he's got value somewhere. Cade Otton is another name. Great season. I know there are a lot of injuries in the wide receiver room, but I think he re-signs with Tampa, and I think that's good to be with Baker. Jake Ferguson, it's Dallas, so get your magic 8 ball out and ask it the question, will Jake Ferguson be good? I don't know. Figure it out. Trey McBride obviously isn't going anywhere. I don't think he'll reset the tight end market, but he should get a top of market contract. I think Bowers and Laporta will reset the market when they get paid. But McBride's in that conversation, not in that same tier, but he's certainly in that conversation of best tight ends in the game, given his age and that offense. So McBride should be a Cardinal as long as he's tied to Kyler Murray. Good things are ahead for him. Isaiah Likely is a really interesting case study, and somebody that I am personally paying a lot of attention to next season. And I'll tell you why. If he re-signs in Baltimore, it's probably not great. He maintains his role. That's a possibility. Isaiah Likely has the talent to go somewhere else and be the guy and be productive. So I think if you want to call your shot on Likely, you can do so. I think it's a little early, but I do think as you get to the early to middle of next season, provided that he's healthy, I think it might be an interesting time to buy low on Isaiah Likely and just hope and pray, if you do that, that he gets out of Baltimore and lands in a good situation. Because if he does, he could become what we talk about. What you want in a tight end is kind of the de facto wide receiver 1 or 2 on their team, because he lands in a spot where they are not super established at wide receiver. And that's kind of what Mark Andrews has historically been for the Ravens. That's what Travis Kelce has historically been for the Chiefs. Like, yes, the Chiefs had Tyreek, but like Kelce was their wide receiver 2, if you want to call him that, even their wide receiver 1 at times. And Mark Andrews certainly was the go-to option for Lamar Jackson before they, had Zay Flowers. So I think Likely is a really interesting player because he's in a role right now that he's not going to beat Andrews out in the depth chart, but he's also good enough that if he goes elsewhere, his value could increase, potentially skyrocket. He could be the hot tight end to go and trade for, and I think he should be, provided health, in 2025. That's it, guys. Those are the players whose contracts are coming due at the end of this season or next season. I didn't get into 26. I didn't get into first round picks with 5th year options. We'll cover all that on another show. But I just wanted to give you guys a little bit, because we're in playoffs. You're not really trading. So I just want to give you guys some names that are guys that you need to pay attention to, because in Dynasty, contracts matter. The rule in the NFL is always going to be the same as it always has been. Follow the money. The money will tell you what teams think, what their role is going to be, who's going to get the ball. And that's why you see players like A.J. Brown getting pissed off and saying, well, we need better quarterback play in an interview. You don't need better quarterback play. You're pissed off you didn't get the ball. And they're paying you all this money to get you the ball, and they didn't. So that's why A.J. Brown's having a little temper tantrum there in the locker room. But again, the money's going to tell you where the ball should go and what that role is going to be. Let's jump into some Q&A. Michael Lopez, appreciate you being here, saying McCormick or Patrick Taylor in full PPR. I'm going to say McCormick simply because we haven't seen Patrick Taylor yet. Not like we saw McCormick. McCormick had a good showing last week in that Raiders game. He was valuable. He caught. I don't have his stats in front of me. Caught a couple passes, had a good day, 70 plus yards on the ground or in totality, if my memory's right. But had a solid day. So I would roll one more week with McCormick, especially if you are either in the playoffs or if you are like some of these smaller leagues. This is the last week of the regular season, and you're trying to make the playoffs. Scott White, good question, man. Do you expect anything from Tim Patrick or Fool's Gold? So I have picked Tim Patrick up in a couple leagues where he was on the wire just to have him. I talked about it with Kendall last week on the Friday show, on our main show. I think Tim Patrick is going to hurt Jameson Williams, is going to hurt Amon-Ra. And I say that because you saw it. The proof was in the pudding last week on that Thursday night game against the Packers. There's only so many touchdowns in a game. Now, the Lions are a team that can score 5 touchdowns in a game. We expect the running backs to get at least one of the touchdowns pretty much every week. Whether it's Monty or Gibbs, doesn't matter, but we think one of them is going to score every week, which means there's only so many touchdowns left over. I don't think Tim Patrick is going to repeat what he did last week. I don't think he's going to be a 2-touchdown, 1-touchdown guy every single week. I think it's hard to start him, but I also think if you want to take your shot on a high-octane offense and upside, if you're banged up, if there's no more bye weeks, but if you're banged up or if you're just, you need to get different, a little bit different, maybe there's some correlation. The person you're playing against has Amon-Ra and you need to flex somebody, flex Tim Patrick, because if the touchdown goes your way, it's almost like getting double points because it means Amon-Ra is not scoring. So I picked Tim Patrick up as a break glass in case of emergency. I'm not going to start him, but I also think that we still have 3 weeks of fantasy. We've got a lot of football left, but I think we've got 3 weeks of fantasy football left to play. Knock on wood, everyone stays healthy, but as well as I do, that's not always the case. So having Tim Patrick is a good stash, but not someone that I would start right away. Rasta thinks Higgins is going to Las Vegas. There's probably about 30 to 31 teams that he could go to. So we'll see what happens there. And our guy, Wicked Pompano, appreciate you being here, brother. Big fan of the show. Big supporter. Attempted to buy low at the trade deadline. Traded away a late 25 second, a mid 25 third for Stephon Diggs, Nick Chubb, and Spencer Rattler. Interesting. He wants to know if that's a W or an L. Pompano, if you're here, still, throw your league size and format into the chat for me, please. Half PPR, full PPR, 10, 12. If he's not here, no stress. I don't think it's a win or a loss. I know that's the easy cop-out answer. I'm looking at it like this. Diggs is on IR. I have no idea how much time he's going to miss to start the season. Is he going to be healthy for the season? I don't know the answer to that yet. Is he going to be a Texan? I don't know the answer to that. Nick Chubb, is he going to be a Cleveland Brown? Probably, but he's old. He's coming off of 2 catastrophic knee injuries. He's not having a great season. He's not going to get a Saquon Barkley kind of contract, and he's not Derrick Henry where someone's going to pick him up to make him the guy and just run him into the end zone every week. So I like the Spencer Rattler pickup, especially right now, because Derek Carr is dealing with, we don't know what he's dealing with, but it is possible that he is potentially going to be out the rest of the season. I also think with Derek Carr's contract, interesting. I think I missed Derek Carr. I must have. Derek Carr's contract's up next year as well. I should have had that at the top of the show at the 2 quarterback contracts in 25. I think it's possible that Rattler becomes the guy there. So I like that part of the trade the best. If this is a super flex league and you traded a late second and a third for Diggs, Chubb, and Rattler, I think that's a win. If this is a single quarterback league, I think it's okay. I think it's a fair trade. I would feel better. I would feel better if I knew what Diggs' status was. A late second and a mid third. You guys that play Dynasty, if you're listening to this show, if you're watching it live, if you're listening on Spotify or Patreon at any time, you guys know as well as I do, those picks could easily bust and become absolutely nothing. So I think it's a win in the sense that, like, you get known commodities in Diggs and Chubb. I just don't know what their value is going to be because we don't know where they're going to be playing next year. We don't know their health. But you know that 25 second could easily bust, and that 25 third may not even make the team. Now, if it's the next Puka Nacua that you traded away, fine, but you never know that. That's not something you can predict. But at the end of the day, I like the Rattler piece of this trade the best personally. And I like that it's a late second because the thirds, I don't care about thirds. I'll be honest. I trade almost all my 3rd round picks away in my leagues. If I acquire 3rd round picks, I almost always package them with other players, when I'm trading for a veteran. So I don't think you'll miss the picks. And I think you've got known commodities, Pompano. So I think it's a good trade. I think it's fine. Especially if it's super flex, because I think Spencer Rattler is the most valuable piece. Obviously, you don't know what those picks, there's no names to those picks yet, so we don't know who they will become. But on paper, as picks for players, Rattler is the most valuable player in that trade. And that brings me to I'm glad this question was asked. It kind of brings me to my last thing that I will say here as I wrap the show. I've said it before. I'll say it again right now, guys. Please, 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 when you are trading draft picks, especially when it is draft season, right now, you cannot assign a name to the player, to the pick, I mean. But when it is draft season, please assign a name, because when you look at it and you go, Rasta, I'll give you a late first for George Pickens. Okay. But when I get into that, I'll use this year's class. Am I giving Brian Thomas Jr. for George Pickens? Am I giving Ladd McConkey for George Pickens? Right? Am I giving Trey Benson for George Pickens? Because those were the names that were late first, early second rounders this season, right? Keon Coleman. So please assign a name to that actual pick. And if you are one of those people who put stuff into a trade calculator, please put the name of the player that you think that person's going to draft for the player that you are acquiring, or the player that you would have drafted in that spot if you're trading that pick, so you can get a true evaluation. Again, y'all know me. I don't think trade calculators are the gospel, and I don't think there's something that you should just, but Keep Trade Cut says I need to add another player to make this an even trade. Bullshit. Watch football. If you think it's a good trade, trade. Who cares if it's even or not? If it's a player that helps your team, you won the trade. That's always been my biggest advice. If you need a wide receiver and you have to overpay, overpay. If you happen to underpay, underpay, because player values, it's just like the stock. It goes up, it goes down. You just don't know what is going to happen. You don't, like, I traded for Christian McCaffrey in one of my main dynasty leagues. I didn't really want Christian McCaffrey because he's older and I don't think he's going to be the next 10. I'm not going to get 10 years out of him. I might get 2 or 3 years out of him, but I play Dynasty in a 2 to 3 year window. What happened 2 weeks after I traded for Christian McCaffrey? Boop, end of season. Am I happy I have him next year? Of course, right? I've got a loaded roster. I thought if I trade for McCaffrey, I'll never miss. It's a late first round pick. I'm a playoff team. Even without the McCaffrey injury, I still have a chance to win this league. But all of a sudden, 2 weeks later, he's not on my roster. I traded for him so I could get him for the playoffs and feel really good about that. It's just how it goes sometimes. So on paper, I lost that trade. Who cares? So please assign names. It's really, really important, and it will help you make a determination of what you want to do for real versus just saying an arbitrary value that gets assigned to a first, second, or third round pick. If you're a fan of the show, y'all know what to do. Please hit that like and subscribe button. It helps me, helps the brand, helps everybody grow. I will be back tomorrow. It's the Niners tomorrow. I may not be back tomorrow. We'll see. Normally I do my betting show on Thursdays, but it's Niners football tomorrow night on Thursday night, so I may not be back, but I will be back on Friday with Rasta for part 2 of our Sit Start series. Make sure you guys tune in on Friday to our Sit Start part 1 at 6 p.m. Pacific time, 9 p.m. Eastern time with Kendall and Classic Mike as they take you through the first half of the games. And then make sure you stay tuned at 8 o'clock West Coast time, 11 Eastern, as Rasta and I take you through the second half of all of the games on Friday. If you are not in the playoffs, make sure you are doing your very best to start looking for some trades. Make sure you are looking at what your rosters are going to look like for next season. If you are in the playoffs, best of luck to you. And I hope our advice and the advice that you get from all of the guys here at Get Right Fantasy Network help bring home a championship, ring, belt, and of course, the cash prize. See y'all possibly tomorrow, but for sure on Friday. Thanks for tuning in to another episode of The Extra Point. We out.
White fantasy is the play. Marking nothing, but I tune in every Friday. Strategies provide.